Hey there, hello, welcome to my presentation. I am Peter, working with Anshar as a level designer. Previously, I was working for Carbon on VR games, and since VR is not the best developer experience, that's when I've started basically getting interested in this topic, like how to optimize my workflow to make working with something that's fundamentally unintuitive and is bad experience, right? How to make it easier. I'm also the lecturer on the University of Silesia, and that's it about me. So, long story short, I'll be talking first about what do I mean about the UX for designers, and why should you be interested in it. Basically, if you are not a UX designer, please do not leave the room. And what are the most common problems and how do you solve them? I'll be barely scratching the surface here because that's a deep topic. But I want to basically present you a mindset that will help you get through the projects. Okay, so what's UX? That's literally the most basic definition here I found on the internet. Basically, it's all the things that make user experience, which is player, in our case, play smooth. So is the game intuitive? Does it control well? Because if game is terrible to play, if player does not understand how it works, he won't be interacting with the systems that we've prepared for the player, right? So we want them to have as pleasant experience as possible. But, and that's the premise of this entire speech, we keep thinking about players. We have like the entire UX squads, right? UX teams, and they keep designing for players. But we tend to forget that as long as we work on a project, we are the end user of the project, the tools that are created. And just like we think about players, basically replace player with a developer. How tools are handled in the project. Is it pleasant to work with? Because if not, then like every little thing that needs to be added to the project in the engine or in the, even documentation or in a pipeline, basically becomes a nightmare. So it's not only task for UX designers or for tool designers. So basically we've got custom tools. That's the most obvious thing there is, right? When I create a tool for someone else to use, then I need to, once it works, I need to take a step back and design how it is used in the engine, right? That's a thing that we all do when designing tools. But it's not only for tool programmers or for tool designers. Basically, everything that is being interacted with by another people becomes a tool. So, well, that's a broad definition, but documentation, it's not only for the sake of being there. Documentation is also a tool. It helps us navigate through the systems. It helps us establish some guidelines. And it needs to be maintained properly. Just like any other tool, documentation also needs to be taken care of. Once in a project, there's a rule of thumb that documentation doesn't work, people stop reading it. People stop interacting with it. So even if there's one or two people that keep documentation clean, they are documenting their stuff, but others are not. People won't default to documentation when they need a problem. And when they don't default to the documentation, they will go to you to ask questions. Even the pipelines, this is basically how things are made, like step by step. If they are obstructed, if they are unintuitive, if you need like 3 steps on the ladder to just commit anything to the engine, it's not pleasant and it slows things down, right? So even the pipeline needs to be taken care of in terms of, how do I play with it, right? How do I basically do stuff? And blueprints that are quite a huge topic that I'll talk about more later. But long story short, absolutely everyone working on a project should keep in mind how things are done and how others will interact with what I do, right? No matter whether you are a programmer working on a code, no matter if you are a designer, like just doing, level design and placing actors on level, how you would do stuff, how other people see the things that you do, and how do they, let's say, continue after you when you, for example, leave your company. You always have to put yourself into someone else's shoes and see how the things are done. Is the project pleasant to work with? If not, you should think about it a bit more. So basically, most of these issues are really small. For example, if you have to set up something on the level, let's say a button that opens a door, and you need to open level blueprint, bind to that button, and through level blueprint tell the door to open, that's just a free note. Like, nobody will, call you out on this, right? But that's just one thing. And all these little things, they keep piling up. And development process is long. Even for indie games, it's a year or two. For AA games, let's say 2 up to 4 or 5 years. And, well, I'm not going to even talk about AAA, right? Where some games are in development for 7, 8 years. So imagine like all these little things, everything on the level is not designed to handle well. And suddenly adding just a single small thing causes basically avalanche of bugs, etc. Or you just spend 10 hours or on something that you could spend 1 hour on, right? And basically, imagine when project grows suddenly, there's 20 new people and you have to explain them how things work, right? You have no documentation because there was no time for it. You have no comprehensible blueprints or systems in place, and because there was no time to do them. And now you have to make time to teach everyone how everything works here. And they won't work on it intuitively because, things are unintuitive. And you will basically have an avalanche of requests, to explain stuff. And they will set up things in a wrong way, so they will have to be fixed, right? And all this time that you've saved by not doing basic stuff, you will spend it later. That's basically a debt. Like you can imagine, like everyone knows the technical debt term, right? We are all aware of it. But we should also talk about the dev UX debt, because it's just as important. And once this snowball is big enough, it's really hard to stop it. Basically, when you're far in the development process, you cannot go back and reiterate on every little system there is, because the things are already set up on levels. You cannot change them too much, because everything will break. You have no time for that, so you have to deal with the consequences when you have the least time to deal with them. The first step when this happens is when the core team is being set up. So basically, we've got this scenario. We are starting on a new project. There's like literally five of us. And we need to do first playable or prototype, right? So nobody thinks about how to make things approachable, because everyone has full context of the project. You don't need to explain to the programmer what you want to make, because he's there. Like, there's only 5 of you. The communication is great. So you don't do documentation of the early stuff. You don't make sure that they are easy to set up. And let's say you make some quick little tools that are supposed to help you in the prototype, and suddenly after 2 years, someone digs those up. They are absolute nightmare to use because you were only thinking about yourself while doing them, because they were not supposed to be used, and suddenly everyone is using them, and it's too late. So we as UX do not notice these issues because we are aware of them. We have them on daily basis, and at some point the team will grow, and suddenly when there's 20 people, you can still maintain like the close communication, but if there's another wave of people, 20, 30, suddenly project has 70 people, and all these little things that you've made in the beginning, there's absolutely no time to fix them now. So basically, even if you're starting the project, think about how everything there is will work later. So I will provide you with some basic examples, like the most common issues that I've encountered. I will tell a bit why they happen and how you could fix them potentially. I mean, if you're in the late stage of the project, you probably can't, but keep it in mind for later ones. And the examples I'm using are from Unreal Engine 4, but it's not about, I will tell you how to fix some stuff and some tips and tricks from Unreal, but it's about the mindset of thinking about these things, not how you achieve them, right? So, yeah. So, inconsistencies. This seems small. Basically, each and every one of us has some personal style of doing things, especially when we come, for example, from another company, and we tend to, let's say, name functions in a specific way. And or basically, the entire workflow, right? We have our own personal, ways to do stuff. And suddenly, there are the example on the right, there are 5 functions, and 3 of them have set in the name. So you always set stuff, set controller, set hidden in game, set parameter value, and suddenly there's a function that's called make active instead of set active. And let's say you're a new programmer looking for a specific function that you need. If you cannot find it, there's a huge possibility that you will create one and name it differently. And suddenly there are 2 similar functions doing the same thing in the project. And once it's done, it's too late because they both will be used. They will, root themselves in the project and you cannot change it. There's an example from details panel, for example, especially when you are setting things up, a lot of setting up. You don't really read stuff. You don't always understand everything, and you basically work with your memory. So in this example, there's a random health of enemy, and it's a value between 25 to 100 with minimum health and maximum health. And below, there's something else that also has random health. But instead of min-max, someone else who created it in its own style, he created default health with deviation. So when I was setting up enemy health, and then I moved on to set up the random health of this thing, I've also set up 25 to 100, which basically meant that it went into negative values. And I haven't noticed that because, I was used to the one on the top. How to fix that and prevent that? Naming conventions, first of all, that's a really important thing. They should be established as quickly as possible in the project, since everything that will be created should follow them. And if there's a unique case, and there's a possibility that in the future it won't be that unique, that there will be more things that needs naming, you should always update naming conventions. it's good practice to name things similarly to the creators of engine, because people that come, for example, from different projects or from different company, they will know the engine, but they won't know your project. So if you use guidelines similar to the engine's creators, those people will intuitively navigate your engine, and it will be it will be easy to find what you need, just because everything is named similarly. Quick fixes: call out people when you see that they don't follow anything. Because if someone freshly committed something to the project, if you call out it, it's like a 1 minute fix to change a name or something. But when something takes root, well, you probably all know how hard it is to change names, like in production, etc. And you are left with those, and well, it's hard to navigate. And quite a funny example of another thing is to decide between American and British English. Everyone who speaks English, so some prefer British, some prefer American, and you need to decide which one are you using for your project. Because people speaking British English have a tendency to write, for example, color with OU, or armor, etc. And then you are looking for, let's say, base material color red, and you cannot find it. There is none, so you create one, right? And then it turns out that there was color red, but it was, in British English, right? And you basically duplicate assets and create chaos in your content just because of such a trivial thing, like how the things are written. Yeah. So basically, I think every one of us seen this image at some point. Well, I don't need to say that it's an absolute nightmare for debugging, for changing anything, for adding anything. Don't look at it, or it will break, right? Basically, and everyone is afraid of this. And why this happens? It's often done in a quick way. You need a quick feature ASAP, right, to showcase to someone. So you do it, and it works. Awesome. So we go to another feature. It's just a blueprint. Programmers will fix that later. And then it turns out that something needs to be added to this feature. So basically, an audio team goes in and adds some audio cues, and VFX artist needs to add some explosions. So they go in and add some explosions, and suddenly you've got a thing that you've made. It's an absolute monster that is rooted deep in the project, and you cannot do anything about it because it costs just too much to handle monster like that. So you gotta live with this. Okay, how can we do this? First of all, make sure to, invest some more time in it. Like, if you are in the middle of a feature and you see that it could have been done better and quicker, go back and do it better and quicker. If a designer tells you that there is absolutely no way that this feature will grow, get ready for the feature that will grow. Blueprint guidelines are the thing for entire, for lots of speeches. But like the rule of thumb is do not repeat logic. If you've got a few clusters of logic that do the same thing, they should be a function or a macro or anything. But basically, make sure that you don't have multiple things that do the same. Reduce amount of nodes. The less, the better. And some people are not aware that there are multiple nodes that basically are like this one, where I'm checking if the default scene root is valid, and then there's a branch. But if I right-click on the variable, I can turn it into a validated get. And those two are exactly the same, but one is 3 nodes and one is 1. And when you've got huge blueprints that do multiple things, like character, for example, make sure to split this into graphs and functions. So, for example, you've got movement graph, or I don't know, damage graph, or use even the actor components to handle things like health, etc. And I mean, blueprints are handled by designers most of the time because they allow us to implement and showcase things. Go and ask programmers to review your blueprint. You will learn a ton this way, because blueprints basically follow the same principles as code. They may seem simple tool, like a placeholder tool for doing some quickies in the engine, but this is still code, and it should follow the same principles. Ask programmer to review your blueprint and fix it. You will learn a lot from them, and you will be able to do much more complicated stuff in the future without it falling apart. There's also another UX thing in blueprints. When we are fixing something or adding, there's often chunks of old code that we do not really know what to do with it. Delete it, like immediately. Some people comment this, like unpin it from the logic and just put a comment. And then you've got blueprint that is 10% actual code and 90% comments that this should be deleted. But nobody wants to touch it because it's not mine. I'm just doing a quick fix here. I'm not going to delete it. This is what the repository is. If you delete something and it turns out it was actually important, you can revert. And you won't create monsters. Basically, make sure that your blueprints are readable and clean. You should be able to read them like a book. You go in, and node after node, if they are properly commented, you can, without even knowing really what the blueprint is about, just read the comments and find out quickly where is your flow in logic. Make sure that all your variables, even the ones that you consider absolutely obvious, are commented. And use the alignments in the blueprint. They allow you to basically make clean and smooth blueprints. Categories, descriptions, make sure that everything is as easy to read as possible. Yeah. Okay. So there's this problem quite often that when we are using a lot of streaming levels, for example, level is split into audio, graphics, logic sublevels, you need to do a few things that happen in the same time, more or less, but levels cannot communicate between each other. And for example, you've got audio team that needs to implement some sound that needs to happen, and animation team that needs to, play the cutscene. And then you've got logic team that needs to spawn enemies. So basically, we've got 3 or 4 triggers, one next to another, and each of them handles different thing on different levels. And yeah, overusing level blueprints is also not the best way. Because even if you've got the simple logic, like button opening door, there will be a lot of it. And at some point, you will have giant trees of logic just for each sublevel. And imagine the situation where every button is on level blueprint and activates door, but programmers change the function that is used for opening the door. And you need to basically go through all your levels, find each instance of this logic, and replace it in blueprint. And remote events are also problematic. They are quite handy. That's for sure, and they allow you to communicate between levels. And the problem with them is that the events that they trigger are not referenced by them. So if you right-click on the event and try to look for references, the engine will return none. If you try to delete it, if you try to delete a function that is used, the engine will prompt you, hey, do you really want to delete it? It's referenced. So you look for references and it's safe. But here, you just delete it and engine allows you, because it does not know that this event is called by a remote event. Although handy, they can be a nightmare, because when you're cleaning up your blueprints or changing something, you won't be able to find every instance of this in your level. So, what can we do about all that? I like the way of representing logic on levels visually. Instead of having a trigger that does 5 things on overlap. For example, we've got a trigger that plays cutscene and a dialogue and a pop-up window for a player. Instead, I create actors, and each actor is responsible for one thing. So basically, there's like a health actor and a power-up actor. And instead of assigning to overlap and calling these actors, I attach them on level to the trigger through one click of the function, and they bind themselves to this trigger. Basically, that completely eliminates level blueprint logic, because all these actors, they just start listening to the trigger, and they know when to stop. This way also, thanks to icons, helps you represent what is happening on level. So you've got a trigger and a few icons floating around it. So you never have to go into level blueprint to find out what's actually happening. You just got those icons that tell you immediately that when player overlaps this trigger, he gets health and a power up. And that's it. You don't need to go into details. Instead of using remote events, you can use soft references. These are not used quite often, and I really don't know why. Maybe designers are afraid of them, but they allow you to get a reference to object on a different level. And when you resolve this reference, you get a hard reference in Blueprint. So this actor has a soft reference to a trigger box. So if there's an icon that plays an audio cue or a dialogue, it is being placed on audio level, not a logic one, but it's assigned to a trigger that is on a logic level. And you don't need, to have 5 or 6 triggers for, each person that needs this space. You just have multiple actors. But don't suck them completely. Level blueprints are also a useful tool. Just make sure that you are using them for things that are actually unique for your game. There's no reason to create multiple actors just to, for example, handle a unique cutscene playing, right? You can just do it from level blueprint. But if there is something that you actually repeat often, try to make an actor out of it. So if there's pretty often a trigger that, let's say, casts to a player and then works only once, there's only cast to and do once, maybe make a custom trigger or an actor that handles this event that you so often repeat. And yeah, icons, lots of icons. They really help you. And what's most important about this, icons can be easily filtered out when you're working on level. Because in level blueprint, you need to, you cannot hide logic. But on the level, you can just select all instances of an actor and hide everything. So you can select 2 or 3 classes that you don't want to see. You hide them, and you hide them throughout the entire level, and you have no problem with navigating it. So when everything is visible, this may turn into a bit of chaos, but this is a chaos that you can easily control. Also, the clear sublevels division. This really helps you with managing conflicts with your other teammates. It's always better to have unique level for artists and for audio and for logic. This way, everyone can walk in a similar space on the level at the same time. Try to always remember that level is a playground for every mechanic and system in the game. So if you don't make sure that they are easy to navigate and easy to control and manageable, you will get absolute chaos at some point, because everything meets there. Okay. Details panels, especially when it comes to huge classes, let's say some combat scripting, if it's managed via tool, and you've got like this one giant details panel that has a lot of variables in it. The biggest problems with details is that it's one-dimensional. It's just, a straight line of variables. And when you've got a lot of them, it's very easy to make mistakes, because everything looks really similar, and it becomes unclear and hard to manage and hard to edit. What you can do is, for example, break bigger actors into smaller ones. So instead of having one, for example, giant controller that handles combat in an arena, split it into smaller ones, and each one has its own field of work. So you can manage details of each actor, or create data assets or data tables. If you've got programmer's team and you see that your tool is problematic to set up, ask them for custom widgets, custom controllers that allow you, to just edit the things in a visual way. Okay, so just like in case of players, we can never trust other developers. So a simple question, would you ever trust player not to break your game? Like, put a sign, do not go there or the game will crash. You always make sure that your game is as unbreakable as possible, and you should address it in a similar way when you are working with engine, with other developers. Basically, nobody is perfect, and when the project is great, big, there's a lot of stuff that we need to remember about. Like, always remember to set up this one thing before you start working, or everything will, not work. And, always remember to set this up before doing something else. And there's only so much we can remember. And especially when we are in a hurry, we will forget about this eventually. And then we will go to the programmer that was making it and ask them for help, because it's not working. So we've got a lot of tools that allow us to control that. For example, you can display custom message windows in Engine. So if something is absolutely critical to set up, don't allow a designer to progress until he sets it up. So basically, if you touch anything on level and the thing that is needed is not set up, prompt him with a window that he needs to set up this first before he can proceed. If he ignores it and tries to progress anyway, he gets the window again. And he cannot do anything until the critical thing is done. You can also display this custom message, this banner that appears in the corner of the screen. So we've got tools that, if they are not set up properly, they will attack us with this one. And there's also a message log. Programmers can add to it custom messages that are displayed during, for example, map check. And it's also an important tool to keep things manageable. But message log and things that are dismissible are often, skipped, and people do not read them. Message log pops up and someone that just turns it off. And even this thing, like this banner that appears, there are cases where it's like on the entire screen and the person still misses it. So basically, if something is breakable, then someone will eventually break it. They will find a way. So you should put as much work as possible into making your things safe to use. If something needs to be remembered, be aggressive in the communication. If there is some variable that, if set up improperly, will break the tool, do not allow me to set this up improperly. Like put clamps on the variable. Make your tools safe, basically. And it's important to, once your thing works, always take one step back and try to find out how to make it work, pleasantly for the one that will be using this thing. Ask others, let them, play around with your tool before you actually commit it to the engine. Okay, we all like to be lazy, and we are working on basically calculation machines that can do a lot of stuff for us. If there is anything in the project that requires you a lot of clicking, a lot of manual work, there's a huge chance that the computer can do it for you. And whenever you can, try to lighten your workload. Try to optimize things and automate them. And there are utilities in Unreal. They are a great tool, even for designers, because they really require you a rudimentary knowledge of blueprints. And they've got an entire suite of editor scripting options. So, like, the most basic examples are placing multiple elements. So, some traces, for example, on navigation, you press one button and it places things on the level. Conditional selecting. Imagine a case where you've got, a little physical rocks on the level. They all have set up collision, and then there is a request from programmers that the collision preset has changed, and you need to find the rocks that use the old one and replace it. And there are 17,000 rocks on the level. Good luck. And creating things like select all with the same property, select only visible with the same property, it's a few clicks, it's a few nodes where you can on loop iterate every actor. You don't care about performance at this point, it's only in editor. And it basically selects stuff for you. Then you just do one click and it's all done. And they are really simple. So yeah, please look them up. But basically what I want to say here, go into toolmaker's mindset. Try to be lazy at work. Be as lazy as you possibly can. Let the stuff happen without your mindless clicking. Okay, oopsies. So basically, it's all of those really small mistakes, easily fixable mistakes that create a huge consequences. Imagine you are working on a level, setting something up, and you just commit it, and you forgot to commit persistent. And right after you commit, there's a build, which takes, let's say, 2 hours. And after this, QA downloads this build. Your level doesn't work, and they go to the producer to report a task. The task goes to a, let's say, programmer because the game crashes, so he needs to investigate why it crashes, and programmer asks a producer for a ticket, so you fix it. But immediately after committing this, you committed the fix almost immediately, but it broke the build, and it took like 4 or 5 hours time out of the production time. So always try to have personal responsibility. Nothing will happen if you put an additional 10-15 minutes into checking your work. If you make a small change on level, for example, in some actor, play through this level, go even on slow-mo, anything with debugs, just play it, test it, check if it works. Shelves, in case of Perforce, they are called shelves. In Git, they are branches. If you have some big changes, potentially destructive, commit it to the shelf or different branch and test it on build. Cook it and see if everything works. Because this way, you you make sure that the main branch of the project is always clean and always works. And if you actually made an oopsie in the branch, nothing will happen. You will just notice it, fix it, and commit to the main branch. And sanity checks. Try to play the pong with others, and invite them to your workspace and let them check out if everything works. Because maybe you are not aware of some little things that may create problems later. And some additional words about QA. They are pretty invaluable when it comes to testing UX. So if you create, for example, an actor that will need to be set up on the level, ask QA, let them play around in engine, because they have no they have no technical context, they have no design context, because they do not work in engine on daily basis. So they will be the first ones that will notice that something is hard to use or unintuitive. If you made something that is easily breakable, they will break it immediately. This won't cost them a lot of time, but you will save a lot of time of other designers working later in the project. To summarize everything, basically think about the future. Think about the future where you are, let's say, not in the project already, and think about others and how they will handle things on levels. Try to make your work in engine as pleasant as it's possible. If you roll your eyes whenever you have to edit something on level, this is not the way. Okay, so a few words from Anshar. We are hiring. You can find us on the first floor. And our Łukasz Hacura and Marta Fiak also have speaks today, so please go see them. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Piotr. We appreciate your work, and I hope that thanks to Peter's knowledge, now all your UX work will be much more easier and much more efficient. If you have any questions for Piotr, this is time for questions.
You can also catch me, later.
Absolutely. So thank you for your attention. Thank you, Peter. And
thank you.
Have a nice break.
Cheers.